Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. I'm Josh Lindquist, and today my co-host Will Shaw, who's looking fantastic with his excellent. My favorite shirt of yours that you have is that one, and your hair's looking very spiffy. And today we have David Green, author of In Solitude's Shadow, joining us. Very excited to have you on the podcast, David.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I feel well underdressed with Will's shirt in my orange fisherman jumper that I'm wearing. The beard also adds to that kind of look as well.
We've got the beard thing going here on the podcast. It's very, very rugged.
Very rugged indeed.
As we go around as well, there's less hair as it goes on to me, which
yep.
I have enough hair for all of us right now.
Yeah, yes, you do. Awesome. Well, David, tell us about In Solitude's Shadow. Let the viewers know what it's all about.
Well, funnily enough, I have a copy of it right here. Just in case you asked, it's there. It's just hanging around the place. So it's the first in the Empire of Ruin series. So originally it was going to be a trilogy, but I decided whilst drunk the other night that it was going to be 4 books.
Nice.
Because when you've had a few drinks, and you kind of, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes all my ideas come either when I'm trying to sleep or I'm trying to relax.
Yeah. When you get that nice clarity when you just can let your brain work.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was out with my family for a little meal. We went for a few drinks afterwards, and I was just sat there, and as some of them were arguing about something that I can't even remember what they were arguing about, I drifted away into my own little place. And I was kind of, I'm writing the sequel to In Solitude's Shadow at the minute, and I was kind of like, it's getting bigger and bigger, the book. Like I expected that anyway, because the first one, I wrote it slim enough for people that, because I think there's a bit of a movement at the moment where people are kind of like, they're looking for novellas a lot of the time, or very kind of short reads. But this was epic fantasy, so it's kind of like, first one, I'll aim for about 70,000 words. Yep. But the next one will be bigger. So I expected that. But I'm working on the sequel, and I'm like, there's a lot to do after this with one more book left, right? That's because I'm writing I'm more experienced writer now. So I'm writing a little, which is weird. You get more experienced and write longer, because I think it's just like, you need to do a better job at certain things. So I was kind of like, well, I don't think there's enough story for 4 books. So I've been struggling with this for a while, and I was like, what can I do? And then, so I sat there listening to zoned out while some people were arguing about something. And then the idea came to me, and I was like, there it is. I can do 4 books, right?
Excellent.
So 4 books. So for the last year, when I've been talking about this book, it came out in June last year, and obviously it's been on the way to release. I've been like, it's a trilogy. It's been set out to be a trilogy and everything, but it was at one stage going to be a trilogy, but it's not. But it will definitely be 4 books. It won't be any more than 4, right? So it's yeah. So it's epic fantasy. I say that now. I'm like, so yeah, it's epic fantasy. It's dark fantasy. It's not quite. Another author, A.M. Justice, who did The Wizard's Forge, said it was grimdark with hope, which I quite liked, because it isn't quite grimdark.
I like that.
Yeah, it's nice that there is that, and hope is I'm a Star Wars kid, and I'm like, a Lord of the Rings fan, and all this kind of stuff. I'm Wheel of Time.
Me
so
too.
Like, hope is a big kind of thing that I do like to have that kind of thing in there as well. But it does go to some very dark places. The second book, when it comes out, is even darker, but the first one, it deals with drug addiction, PTSD, genocide. So all these nice things like this, xenophobia. And it was kind of written...
A nice light reading.
Nice light reading. So it was written because I grew up in England, but I live in Ireland now. I had an Irish family, and it was written during lockdown, the first big lockdown. So that's why the solitude aspect came into it. And Brexit played into it as well in a way. But as well, I mean, it has these heavy themes and everything, but it's very, very fast paced. It's fun as well. It's an ensemble cast of characters. So there's multiple POVs, so it's always moving towards this conclusion that brings everyone together in this. And it has ragtag heroes and gray characters that are a little bit gray, and so it has a lot of stuff that I really like about fantasy in it that I kind of wanted to do a little bit differently that I hadn't kind of seen. Like the main kind of relationship in it is it's an estranged mother and daughter relationship, instead of like being like someone with daddy issues and stuff like that. It was, you know, a woman with mummy issues basically, and it's about the key kind of falling out is something that all the characters kind of are aware about, and they all have their own opinions on it, and you know, not, and so it keeps coming up as kind of a conflict, and it's no, it's fun. It's something that I was very kind of proud of getting it done, and I'm beavering away on the sequel now, which is the bane of my existence, but it will be done.
Yeah. Well, I heard a great quote once. They said, I don't necessarily enjoy writing. I enjoy having written. And that resonated with me. I was like, yeah, I see that. I can see that.
I enjoy the process of it, but then when I kind of finish my like session of writing, I'm kind of like, am I anywhere near the end of this book? I don't think I am. Sometimes I am, but then I kind of like I'm in between a plotter and a pantser. So like I know where it's going, but then I will have an idea where it's like, right, I can fit this in as well. Let's do this, and then it's like 20,000 words later. It's like, right, back onto the outline. Let's get back to where we're going.
Yep. Well, I find that those detours tend to have the most fun kind of story beats because they just kind of flow from you. Yeah. So you can kind of get like, just you're like, this just makes sense where it's going, and you just kind of get in that flow, and then it's like back to the outline, where are we going? Because I'm kind of the same way, where I'll have an outline, but it's not super structured. It's just kind of like one paragraph per chapter, and then I kind of go from there. So
yeah, exactly. I got, because the big detail that I'm dealing with at the moment in Path of War is because I got up to the part in the outline where it was like, Colleen has what's the word that I use? Colleen has a dilemma, and that was just what I thought, right? And I was like, when I obviously did the outline, I was like, I must be thinking I'll decide what this dilemma is when I get to it, and then this dilemma has ended up being this like really kind of sword and sorcery style adventure bit for a little while, which I've had a lot of fun writing it, and it's I've managed to like blow up a castle, murder a load of people. Colleen's running around with a one-armed man that's an expert rapier fencer.
Nice.
So, you know, it's just, and that just came out of nowhere. It wasn't in the plan or anything, but I had a lot of fun writing that bit. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, sounds like you've got a pretty big world already set up there. Like, how much background have you already created for this world, and how much do you have to just kind of improvise as you're writing?
I did quite a lot of work on the world, but I did it in a weird kind of way. So I did on the first book, I did the very first draft of it, which was just the bare bones of the story, and it had the kind of just very thinly sketched out version of the world and everything like that. Like, you know, some of the places, most of the places, there were some places that were just called insert town name here and what have you, and all that. But it had like the core concepts of like the magic system and the religion that's involved with the magic, because the religion is kind of meshed with the magic system in this world, and kind of like the relationship between the different races and all that kind of stuff. So I did the first draft, and it was about 35,000 words, which was just basically just the bare bones of like the chapters with like that. And then I filled out the world on like some documents after that, and went back and said, okay, this is what I need to do for this story. It was all from the story point of view. So it was like, I want to see what I wanted to do with the story first. And then I went, okay, well, how does the world serve the story? And then how can I build out from that to make it feel like a real world where I could tell other stories in this world at some point in the future if I wanted to. So then after the first draft, I spent maybe a month just working on all this stuff, character histories, race histories, different parts of the world that are set in, like different continents and all that kind of stuff. And then I didn't really use a lot of that for the first book. So when I went back to do the second draft, it was then just filling out kind of other aspects of it, and then just giving these kind of little hints and coming up with, like, it has its own kind of swearing system in there as well. So
that's fun.
Yeah, that was fun, and that was religious based. But on the first draft, it was all just real swearing. So it was like, I tried to put appropriate swear words for what I've used that are real swear words, right? And so there was all that kind of stuff, and then a lot of the main kind of world building that I kind of worked on is coming into the second book, because it's the first book is fairly self-contained. Some of the characters, there's basically 3 locations that the characters are based in, and they all kind of converge in one place.
Okay.
Whereas in the second one, it's a lot more far-flung. There's like asides from people that are in cities that are on the map, but we didn't get to in the first book, and this kind of stuff. So, it all works into it. But it's good, because hopefully it gives people a feeling that this world actually exists beyond the story that's being told.
Yeah.
Which is my favorite things. And when I'm reading books,
Yeah.
you can kind of tell, like, when you can compare Terry Brooks to Robert Jordan, for example. I like Terry Brooks, but if you compare the first 3 Shannara books to the first 3 Wheel of Time books, for example, the Shannara ones feel very narrow. It's the world is kind of just what the characters can see around them, basically. Whereas like Wheel of Time, you're hearing about all this kind of history, and you're hearing about all these different cultures everywhere from the very first book. So you know that there could be, and there is, other stories going on in that world that we just don't know about until later on, and that's something that I try to get across in my own stuff.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the things that was a little bit jarring when because I remember the first time trying to read Wheel of Time when I was like, I have very poor age reference for kids, but we'll say little kid. Little sounds like 5 to me, but yeah, it was around that time when I first picked up the Wheel of Time book, and I was going through it, and like you get to like a certain part, and it's just explained like this is how it is, and in my brain it's like, did I miss something there? There's clearly another story going on here that is completely unrelated to the plot, and now I need to know that.
Yeah. I mean, he got a lot better at kind of meshing it in with the rest of the story, because like the third Eye of the World in particular just kind of hits you on the head with like a load of different. I mean, the first part of the book is just characters arriving at Emmons Field going, I'm this person, here's my story, and also here's another story about something as well. And it's like, okay, this is a lot of information, right? But like, so it's kind of like, I do enjoy that. I do enjoy feeling like I was on a panel at a fantasy convention last year, and we were talking about what do you do when the story is done? Like, can you go back to that world and do readers want it? And we kind of talked about, and I was kind of the opinion that, yes, you can. Like, if the world is only because you've told this story in this continent here, doesn't mean that there's not other stories everywhere else that's being done. And if it's a good world and it's interesting, then why not go back to it?
No, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm very familiar with the fan fiction community, so even in like small worlds, there's always more to like explore there. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing when you are setting up like a fantasy world there, of actually having it feel like this is a bigger world than just these 3 characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when are we gonna get your D&D campaign setting for this book? Because it sounds like you've already done all that work.
I'm gonna really kind of hamper my chances of ever anyone wanting to talk to me ever again. But I've never played D&D, so
that's okay.
I've always wanted to. I did.
We can make that happen. Just throwing that out there. Me and Will both DM pretty well, so
excellent. I mean, so many people have always been like, "You really should play it," and I was like, "I know, I should." I have a really addictive personality, so when I get into something, everything else stops. And so it's that. But I should do.
D&D is like cocaine for the brain. So if you're creative, so it can be quite addictive and fun.
No, I really should do it one day. I should do it as like my treat when I finish Path of War. I'm like, I'm gonna learn how to do this.
There you go. Yeah, hit me up when that happens. I'd love to help teach you the ropes.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, have you been a fantasy, like, aside from writing, like, have you been into fantasy for a while then?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I where I grew up in England, I was very lucky because just this place just outside of Manchester, and there was a local writer called Alan Garner who wrote fantasy stuff, and it was like it would be fantasy realism actually now. We wrote them in the 60s and 70s when that term wasn't around, but it was basically like fantasy stories that were set quite close to where I lived, and it was all kind of mixed in with Arthurian legend as well.
Oh, that's
So it's
cool.
quite close yeah, so it's quite close to Wales, like North Wales, and that as that. And my family are from Ireland, but also I have family from Cornwall, which is the very south of England, which is where like Penzance is and Tintagel, which is like all mixed up in the Arthurian legend. So that was my first thing that I kind of got into was that. And there's different approaches to that. I mean, you have like the Bernard Cornwell approach, which is very like realistic military fantasy kind of approach to it. Or you have stuff like Mists of Avalon and all that kind of stuff, which was very high fantasy. So I got into that, and then from there it was The Hobbit. Was the first one that I can really remember getting. And I actually still have the same copy that I had from when I was 7 years old.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I know that was 7 because I wrote in it that I was 7. So unless I was lying at some point, I might have been. But yeah, I had put my name in it and my age, and I still have it because I wanted to. When my son's old enough, I want to read it with him. And then obviously from then it was like Lord of the Rings, and then David Eddings came pretty soon after that. That was kind of easy enough to kind of actually. It was quite a bit of a step back from Lord of the Rings. It was a lot easier to ring than Lord of the Rings. But it's still fun though. I had a lot of good time with that. And
there's a slight difference in reading level, but in those books.
Yeah. It was fun. But I think Eddings was my first kind of, obviously Lord of the Rings. I had it in the one book. So I just kind of always used to think of it as one book. And then Eddings was the first one that I kind of read that was like a long series, because there was the first 5, the Belgariad, and then there was another 5, which was practically the same story with the same characters and the same prophecy. It's like, that prophecy you filled, it wasn't the right one, but there's more of the prophecy. You're like, oh, fair enough. Right, and it was good fun. And then yeah, from then onwards, you get more complex and more into different things. I got into Wheel of Time pretty early on. I love that. And I remember trying to read Game of Thrones the first time shortly after it came out, because it was I'd been reading Wheel of Time already, and Robert Jordan did the foreword for it because he was friends with George R.R. Martin. So I was like, I'll check this out because Robert Jordan's done the forward. And I was reading it. I was probably 96 and 97, so I was like 14 or 15. And so I'm used to like high fantasy heroes, chosen ones, and all this kind of stuff. And I was reading Game of Thrones, and I was like, man, this is very different. And then everyone started dying, what I thought were the main characters. And I remember when Ned Stark got his head chopped off, because I was kind of thinking, he's going to get rescued. You can't kill him off. He's the main character. They killed him, and it was left with these kids. And I was like, I'm done. Stopped, didn't read it, didn't go back to it for about until my early 20s, I think. It was just in that time then I'd read a couple of other grimdark stuff. I'd read Joe Abercrombie's first book, I think, and I'd gone and read Thomas Covenant, which I hated. Yes. But then that's because I was younger as well again, but I finished it, and then I went back to Game of Thrones after that and appreciated Game of Thrones a lot more after Thomas Covenant, because I was like, well, you can read a book where you're not supposed to like the main character.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been a big fantasy fan all my life. Yeah, really.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It sounds like that's been a pretty big influence. And you had actually mentioned earlier of like right when you were writing this, you brought up Brexit and the pandemic. And I know here in the States, I don't know about Josh, but when you mentioned Brexit, my brain was like, oh yeah, that was a thing back in the before times. But I mean, I imagine over in the UK, like that's been a pretty prominent thing that you've had to deal with and will still be having to deal with the repercussions of that for decades on. So like, how big of an influence has that been on your story, like as you've been creating that?
Yeah, quite a lot, because it's a weird one, because it was something that was like, the build up for it seemed to take ages, and then the vote happened and no one thought it was going to go through. Even the people that were voting for Brexit were surprised that it happened, and it was only, I think it was 51 to 49% or something, which was
so it was close. Wow,
very close. Yeah, very close. And then it happened, and there was like loads of holdups about it. There was like legal disputes. There was all sorts of stuff going on in the parliamentary system about it. And obviously I live in Ireland, so it doesn't technically has an effect on us in a way, but it did, because we're reliant on the UK so much, with loads of stuff. And obviously a lot of my family's over there, and a lot of my friends are, and you'd be talking to them. And it was just a weird experience, and the way it kind of influenced a lot on, particularly because I have two series, and one series it doesn't influence at all. And I try and keep any of those kind of things out of it, because it's like kind of like it's my playground where I go and just blow off some steam and just have some fun with it, right?
yeah.
Not to say that I don't have fun with Empire of Ruin, because I do, but it's different. But it was kind of like with Brexit, a lot of it was, there was a lot of propaganda going around about particularly xenophobic propaganda, about like, we can stop certain people from coming into our country, and they'll start taking our jobs and all this kind of stuff, which wasn't really true.
Right.
Well, it was like, and that was kind of the thing that I kind of started looking at for. I didn't go in with the intention of doing that, because one of the big influences that in recent fantasy for me is the Dragon Age video game series, which I really, really liked, and I loved the writing in it. And they did some really interesting stuff with xenophobia between races as well, that I always kind of wanted to kind of look at and do my own thing with. And it just so happened that I was kind of reading all this news about propaganda in particular, where people would just see it so much, you just start to just believe it completely, because it's like it's coming from the government, so it must be true. Right? And which has always been the case. And back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, it used to just come from your radio, your newspaper, and your TV, and everyone used to get the same thing. And they would say, "This is the way. Go and do this," and people would go and do it, because they would be, "Well, it's coming from the government, so we should do it." Whereas nowadays, it's a little bit different, because you have news coming from 1,000 different outlets, and people don't trust the government, and people don't do this and this, and it's like, and the news just gets completely garbled. And when you're on social media and everything, I'm on my soapbox now, it's when people on social media and everything, you create like an echo chamber, because the algorithms bend to what you're into and what you're looking at and what you're interacting with, right?
Yep.
So I was kind of thinking, well, let's go and think about, like, with all that in mind, how the UK have managed to get this through. The people that wanted to get it through managed to get it through, had such a tight control over the propaganda and the message of it, which is like unheard of in these days. So I kind of thought, well, let's look at that and bring that into the book and see how that kind of works. So yeah, it was a big influence on that one. And I was able to kind of like take traditional kind of fantasy kind of tropes and then turn them on the head a little bit and do something new with them, because it was like I was able to apply this society of fear, I suppose, onto it.
That's fascinating. I can't wait to read it. That's a lot of depth there. I'm excited.
Yeah, it was fun. It was good. And I'm not like, I wouldn't say that I'm like a overtly political person. Like, I don't really go around and talk about politics to people. And, I have my opinions and everything, but I learned a very long time ago that if you want to fall out with people, you start talking politics, right?
Yeah. Agreed.
And religion. And that's the fun thing about writing a book, is that you can have this idea, and you can explore. And if you've got multiple POVs and you're looking at people from both sides of the divide, you don't have to come down on what you actually believe in. You can have characters that have a completely different view to you, but write them convincingly enough that people might think, oh, this guy actually believes what this guy is saying, right?
Yep.
Which is a little bit different in my other series because it's written in first person, so you have to kind of have some kind of, I suppose, belief to write it convincingly that you agree with what the person is saying in some ways, which is handy because in the other series that I have, the main character is basically me but American and a little bit more exaggerated. So it's like I'll just write what I would do in this situation or what I would say, and that's fine.
That's awesome. What can you tell us a little bit about that story? What's that world's about?
I have this one here too.
Oh,
this
nice.
is that one. The Devil Walks in Blood.
Ooh.
See, I said that I'm not particularly political or religious, but this is very kind of. Well, I'll tell you the premise of this one. This one is so this one is actually there's 2 books in this series, but this one has both of them in the first. In this one, because the first one was a little novella, and it is basically it's private detective gets killed in the first line of the first book.
Oh,
he's as he's lying in this alleyway, kind of bleeding out. He goes off to heaven, and then he gets resuscitated. So he's going up, and he's like an atheist. He's like, man, heaven is real. Who knew, right? And then he gets pulled back into his body, and then when he's kind of comes out of hospital, he's operated on, and then comes out of hospital, he starts seeing like demons and ghosts and creatures of all kind everywhere, just kind of in their own, kind of doing their own thing, going about their own business, and humans are completely oblivious to them. So it turns out he realizes that hell is also real, but we live in hell alongside all these. Right. So he wants to kind of jumps forward 5 years, and he's kind of just been taking jobs for ghosts and other things that are trying to he's trying to help them pass on or help them kind of do whatever, while he's trying to figure out why the world is the way that it is, and also keep his nose clean enough that he gets to go into heaven after when he dies.
Okay.
But then the first book, he is propositioned by the wife, the widow of the person who killed him, who has come back and is haunting her. So she's like, I want you to kind of find out why this guy is following me and everything. And he's drawn into this big kind of like little kind of personal mystery. And then the second book again opens things up quite a lot there's an overarching storyline between heaven and hell and why the world is the way that it is and all this kind of stuff. And he's kind of caught up in the conflict, but it's really fun. Like it's really, again, it's really fast paced. It's very kind of very witty, very kind of sarcastic kind of character. And he's the same age as me. He grew up listening to the same kind of music as me. He likes the same kind of stuff as all that. He's got more hair than I have, and he doesn't have a beard. Pretty much where it ends. But yeah, it's fun, and it's like a lot of people have kind of said it's if you like the Dresden Files, you'll enjoy it. If you like Supernatural or Hellblazer, it's that kind of thing. So there is fantasy elements. It is urban fantasy noir, I call it, and the fantasy elements kind of become more and more apparent as the series goes on.
That's awesome. That sounds like a really fun read too.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's good. I mean, I say it's good. I don't ever read my own stuff after I finish this, so I don't know. Who knows? But people seem to like it, and I enjoy going back to once I finish with Path of War, I'm doing the next 2. The main character is called Nick Halloran, so I'm doing the next 2 Halloran books on the bounce, just to kind of get book 3 and 4 done of those, because I don't know how long this series is going to be. There is a storyline, but I'm going to take a break from the main storyline with the 5th book, because I had an idea about Nick Halloran versus the Cult of Dagon.
Ooh.
So I was like, I have to do this book. Right? So I'd put a couple of lines in the second book about it, because with the way the premises of it, very early on in the first book where like Nick is, the reason I did the 5-year jump after the prologue is because I didn't want to have him finding out all about this, everything as the reader does. I wanted him to be telling the reader, like, this is this place, this is this, because it's first person present tense, so he has to kind of be thinking as he's doing stuff anyway. So I was like, I'll do it that one. So he kind of like says, like, if you've read about it, it's real, like including Bigfoot. I've met the guy. Right?
That's cool.
So in the second book, I said something about like Dagon worshippers causing trouble over on the east on the East Coast, and then I was like, I should do a book about Dagon worshippers. And then one of my good friends is a big Lovecraft fan, and he was like, if you don't tell a story about Dagon or Cthulhu or anything Lovecraftian, I will break your legs. And I was like, yeah.
Guess we got to do it now.
Gotta do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That is, and that's just such a nice vehicle that lets you just kind of break into whatever story you want to tell there.
Yep.
And it's actually, I think that's kind of an interesting setup, because you use heaven and hell there, and that's definitely language coded in Christianity, but kind of the premise there, it's a little more like that Irish or European folklore, where there's just all of this magic and all of these creatures that live just all around us all the time, and you're just not aware of it unless you are.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was trying to do with it, because when I started writing it, I was aware of the Dresden Files. I hadn't read them at that point. I was kind of aware of them, and I had this idea because I'd written a crime book, which is coming out next year at some point. But it was the first book that I ever wrote, which was weird because I don't read crime, right? I like the old noir films and new noir films. I don't read them, and I just wrote this book, and I was like, why have I written this? I don't know. Right? But then I was like, I have an idea, but why not merge it with fantasy? Like, and then I had this idea for this world and everything like that. And but I was aware of the Dresden Files, and I was like, I don't want Nick Halloran to be a magical person. I just want him to be a normal person, but I also want him to be able to hold his own against some of the creatures that he's going to come across, because there's Nephilim in it, there's like demons, there's Wendigos in the first book, there's Amaroks in there as well. There's
awesome. Yeah, in the fantasy book I'm writing right now, they encounter a Wendigo skinwalker, and it goes very poorly for them.
Yeah, exactly. It actually is in the second book, sorry, but it goes quite poorly for Nick as well, because obviously he's just a guy, right? But I have to kind of he has weapons and stuff that he can use, that he kind of creates, like he's and I give them ridiculous names as well. Like I have like names like Battenspergers for like these things that explode and everything, all this kind of crap like that, right? But he basically makes them by hunting down fairies and ripping the wings off them, and then putting the wings into like metal and melting them, and that's how he makes them. And like again in the second book, somewhere he actually says himself, he's like, I'm really going to have to pay the price for making these things at some point, because I bet Queen Maeve is really pissed off with me. And the third book opens with him being chased by a pack of fairies, right? So to do it. But yeah, that's the point. Like I wanted to kind of come up with a premise where it was like a normal person that can just see the truth and actually do something about it, and while having this level of threat. So that was it. I didn't want to do like a magic man fighting magical people, right? He has got a storyline. He's not a chosen one or anything like that. There is something unusual about him, and that will get explored in later books. But the thing that isn't, I'm trying not to give any spoilers away here, but the thing that is unusual about him happens at some point in the books in the future. So it's not happened yet.
Cool.
But in a way, the effects of the thing that has happened, you can see that is going to happen. You can see the ramifications of it, but he's not in any kind of way. So sounds kind of weird. Hopefully I can pull it off and explain it better in the book.
Sounds awesome. No, I love it.
That's kind of the problem when you're trying to explain like something that's so large. That's the advantage of when in the first book, like you have that time skip so that you don't have to learn everything with the character. But then if you're teaching these things to the audience as you're going on, a lot of that is going to be like plot reliant, I'd imagine, of like a lot of this world building, or even just trying to like saying, oh, this creature shows up later. That if you're trying to hint at that, especially with the detective story, I imagine that's got to be like a pretty fine line that you want to walk, where you don't want to give too much away so that your audience can kind of discover this with the characters.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote it first person present tense, was because I wanted when he's learning things, I wanted the readers to learn along with him, especially if it's like, because there is mysteries as well. So I didn't want to have like, you know, him kind of hiding information from the reader, which I think is a big cheat really, when it's like it's just like the character knows but just doesn't do anything about it, right? But then as well in the second book, he so that's in the first book in his office, there's a ghost in the corner of his office that has her back to him, never speaks to him in the 5 years he's been there. She's never said a word to him or anything. And one time he grabbed her on the shoulder and pulled her around, and she's got her eyes are missing, and he just falls backwards, and she just turns back around again. And then something happens.
Creepy, I love that.
Yeah.
Something happens at the end of the second book, and after the kind of ending of the first book, after the end of the first book, he's kind of relaxed in his office thinking like, you know, what a day kind of thing. Like, you know, he's like, I really should learn these lessons. And then the girl turns around and says, I've got a job for you. And that's where the second book starts immediately afterwards. So she's been in this like kind of comatose kind of state for 60 years because she was killed in the 60s. And she wants him to find who murdered her. So she's been kind of aware of his conversations, but kind of like in this kind of like limbo, I suppose. So I was able to use her as a kind of I think it's a nice relationship between them anyway, but I was able to kind of use her as that relationship for Nick to explain some things to her, because it's like, not only is she a ghost and just it's the first time she steps outside of his office in 60 years. It's the first time she's been outside in 60 years, and things have changed. So he's able to kind of like tell her a little bit about the city and about this and about all that kind of stuff. And because what her storyline is, we kind of move around the city quite a lot, because her storyline is kind of the reason why she died and everything. Obviously in America in the late 50s and early 60s wasn't a great, still isn't in some places, but it wasn't a great place for black families.
Unfortunately, that's still a big problem here.
Yeah, and especially when you bring in the religious aspect of it as well, which comes into it in this book quite heavily. It goes to some very kind of dark places, but then it kind of reveals quite a lot about the world as well. So
yeah,
that sounds like a brilliant story. I'd love to read it.
Well, I think the first one is still free until the end of today.
Okay, I'll take you up on that.
It's on Amazon. So we released it as 2 books originally, Dead Man Walking and Devil Walks in Blood. But we liked the covers, but they were a little bit too kind of hardboiled detective, so we just put the 2 books together and released it in a special edition.
Oh, cool.
But the original, so it's called Dead Man Walking Extended Edition, because I released it first as like a short story, then expanded it and I sold it to a publisher.
Cool.
So you can get that one. It's Dead Man Walking Erie River, which is the publisher, and it's free until I think tomorrow, on Amazon. But
excellent.
Yeah,
I'll be downloading that right after this podcast.
Yeah, anybody listening today, go to Amazon.
Yep.
Speaking of which, where can we find all your different books?
Yeah, they're out there. Yeah, so with this one, make sure though you put Dead Man Walking Erie River and not my name, because you put my name, the very original version comes up, the short story one, which is it's very, very short. And this one, the Erie River one, is the one that you want. But it's okay. It's good.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, that's great. Like Will was saying, where can our listeners find your books? All on Amazon?
Yeah, they're all on Amazon. I mean, there's links to them all on my website, which is davidgreenwriter.com. And all my books were the same publisher now, thankfully. So that they're called Erie River Publishing, and you can get all the stuff on there as well. And Amazon, yeah. I think In Solitude Shadow is wide actually, so you can get it on Apple or Kobo or whatever.
Oh,
But
great.
the Nick Halloran ones are exclusive to Amazon at the moment.
Okay. Very cool. I'm sure our listeners are going to check those out. So
yeah.
And if you do, hope you enjoy them anyway, because I'll keep writing them until everyone tells me to stop.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Well, for everything we've heard, they're not gonna tell you to stop. They're gonna say, give us more. So
yeah, I can't say that I've ever met a company who didn't like making money, and having just an endless source of writing seems like a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, hopefully they'll keep going with it. But I have so I've got, to be honest, they actually said for the Nick Halloran once, they were like, I was going to do 5, and then they said, can we do some more? And I was like, I do have ideas for more. And they were like, okay, let's do more. And I was like, that's good. And then when I went to them and told them about my drunken idea of making the other one into 4 instead of a trilogy, they were like, that's great. So I was like, oh, that's okay then.
There you go. Well, I wanted to really quickly ask you about what's your kind of process for writing. Like, how many hours a day do you write? I'm sure our listeners are curious, because we have a lot of aspiring writers who listen to our podcast. So
yeah, I structure my writing very, very, very rigidly. Structure it in terms of like goals. I think I do a bit of ghostwriting as well.
Oh, cool.
For people, so I have clients that I have to write for too, whilst also doing my own stuff. So I kind of like really kind of structure it to what my word. I set out a word count at the start, and sometimes I'll go over a little bit, but usually not too much. And then how many days I have to write it in, and then I have like a little number, and I'm like, this is how much I have to write every day on this project. And then sometimes if I go over, it's like, well, I'm a little bit ahead, but I can also tell if I'm behind. So I spend a couple of hours. I write for a couple of hours in the morning when my son is at preschool. So I do 2.5 hours in the morning, and then I'll do a couple of hours at night time. So usually about 4 hours every day.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see people's process of like with writing. There's a lot of people that treat this as like a job versus treating it like a craft, and just kind of the finding the balance there between just kind of working on this in an artistic way versus kind of structuring your day to do it professionally, which I imagine ghostwriting has to be like largely in that very structured, job focused thought process.
Yeah, because you have very set deadlines for those things, because like part of the part of the payment is getting it in on time, right? So and it can vary as well in terms of how much you put into it, which kind of sounds weird because obviously you're writing the entire thing, but so some people come with a very kind of like rigid outline where it's like down to the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And you can talk to them and kind of say to them like, nothing much is really happening here. This is kind of a repeat of this, and this, and you can kind of develop it a little bit. But then sometimes they're kind of like, this is exactly what I want. Can you just flesh this out, right? And that's fine, okay. But then other people will come across with just like, this is my idea. It's Faye in an academy, and there's a rival academy, and they don't like each other, right? And I want 7 books, 80,000 words each. Right? And you're kind of like, right? And then you're getting quite a lot of leeway, and they'll create some of the characters, and they'll say what they look like, and some I was doing work for someone recently, and they did a big portfolio of artwork of like the world it was set in, and some of the cities, and like the characters, which was great to look at and reference and get ideas from. But then he had no idea about anything else. To be like, we don't know what, I don't. It's just I just had this idea. These are the characters, and that's it. Do whatever you want with them. And I was like, okay. But so yeah, I treat that one very much like a job. and do my set amount of words each day. And if I go a little bit over, that's great. If I go a little bit under, that's okay as well. But then my own stuff, I kind of take it to a certain point, but then I've kind of got myself into, I almost burnt myself out towards the end of last year, like probably June or July, when I was just constantly writing and editing stuff and like, and not giving myself like a day off or whatever. And I got to the point where it's like, it's okay if I take a day off and don't work on this, right?
Yeah.
Gotta have that balance.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And sometimes you take that day to yourself, or maybe 2 days, and then you come back and you're reinvigorated and you've had other ideas, you've gotten drunk and you've thought about loads of ideas, and you can come back and do them, which is great.
Yeah. Sometimes that's hard, like being in that creative mindset for so long, just being able to relax after that. Like if you go a couple of weeks and you're just forcing yourself to be creative every day, do you have any problems just like actually getting into the mindset where you can unwind?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. And I spend a lot of time then procrastinating about what to do with my relaxing time. Which is bizarre, really, because I don't do that when I'm writing. Like, I'll just I have my spreadsheet and I'll just work through it, the projects that I've got to do, and I'll go, right, this. And I speed write as well. So I'll set a time where it's like 25 minutes. I'll write solidly for 25 minutes. Then I'll take a 5-minute break and just kind of like, just go and get a drink or just have a quick look on the internet or something like that, respond to some messages. And then I'll do another 25 minutes, and that's 50 minutes solid on one project. And then that's, couldn't be anywhere between 800 and 1,500 words or whatever. It could be.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's fast. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm quite a fast typer, thankfully. But that's the thing, as you're saying about the downtime, is what I end up doing is when I'm procrastinating to figure out what I want to do, I'm just thinking about what it is I'm going to do next time I go and write.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to figure that out.
I'm sure you'll find the balance. It's good, but man, you're a rock star writer at that speed, man. That's awesome.
I was going to say, I don't think I can type that fast anymore.
I've always been a fast typer. But I was following Brandon Sanderson a few weeks ago, and he was on about wanting to finish. He was like, I've been slacking it off over Christmas, so I'm going to finish my next novella today. And he was like, I've got 16 scenes to do. So I think it'll be about 1,000 words each. So I've got about 17,000 words to do. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. And he did it. Right?
Wow.
Well, I suppose when you're Brandon Sanderson, you can do whatever you want, really.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's always that's the part that always fascinates me when I end up talking to writers, is just like, you don't really have a good perception of like how many words is in a book if you're not a writer, or how many words are actually fitting on a page or in a chapter or in a scene. And that's just always like the amount of effort that goes into this. I think it kind of, a lot of people write just generally typing an email or a message, but the amount of effort that it actually takes to make each of these paragraphs is just something that you don't really see when you're only reading the final product. And all the work that goes in after the writer has actually written it, when it goes to beta readers and proofreaders and development, and then the editor, who will do then development edit, and it can drastically change from that point on, from when the writer has thought, like, this is my final draft, I'm happy with this, it's good, let's send it in to whoever's, and that's if you're self-publishing, indie publishing, or traditionally published. And I'm with an indie publisher, so I don't self-publish, but it's still the same thing. Like, self-publisher will send it off to an editor. There's an editor that works for my indie publisher, and then. But the thing, each kind of step, the only thing that's different is that there's more kind of opinions on everything, right? And I think there's certain things that you can do with indie publishing and self-publishing
that you can't do at traditional publishing, because they'll be like, you can't do this, you can't have so many LGBTQ plus characters in your book if you want to write that kind of thing in a traditional book. They just won't go that way. It's changed.
Really? Oh, they put stuff like they restrict stuff like that. Wow.
It's I mean, it's changing now. Like they catch up to what's already happening in indie and self-publishing, because they will be like, what is going to sell? What's going to sell? How can we market this?
Yeah, because my first book I self-published, but my second one I'm thinking of sending out manuscripts. But one of the main characters is bisexual, so that's interesting. That might be a significant variable with publishing. I never thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'll be something that nowadays that'll be like no straight away. But then there is some things that you kind of look at in the indie and self-published world where it's like very, very diverse, where it might be where they might say this is too diverse for us to market. Who are we marketing it this for? Who do we sell it to, right? And there's all that kind of stuff. And obviously as well, when you go through, I know a few people that are traditionally published, and I mean, the first step is to get an agent, and then the agent will look at it and give notes on the manuscript, and then they have their own editor that will look at it and give notes on it, and then they'll have their own readers that will do the same, and then they'll try and get the manuscript that they already like, but then they'll try and get it into a point where it's like, right, I can sell this to a publisher, and then they'll bring it to a publisher, and the publisher might buy it, and they'll say, okay, we're going to give it to some readers, we're going to give it to our own editors, and then they're all going to give notes on it, and their idea then is to try and change the manuscript into something that they can sell.
Yeah,
and we can look at it
goes through the focus group of you just need one person in that group to be, I'm offended by this.
Yeah, and you know, not to say obviously great stuff does come out of trad, and obviously, but there's a lot of rules with it as well. Like I was talking to someone who's going through the process at the moment, who is with an agent, and they've been working on the manuscript to bring out to pitch to people, to publishers, and she was saying that, it's 150,000 words at the moment, so we need to knock out at least 10,000 words. And I was like, that's kind of weird, because traditional books are usually quite a lot bigger. You have two, and they're like, yeah, that's after the first book, and if you're already quite a big name, you can do pretty much whatever you want at that point. You can do the bigger books because it will sell. But like for a first time author, they don't want, even in fantasy, they don't want anything more than 140,000 words. Which you can. I'm sure Andy Pelequin, who writes 300,000 word self-published books, right? And the great books, but that's the kind of world where it's a little bit different now, where they're like, what is palatable to people, and how are they gonna the consume word? How are they going to consume this?
And I can kind of understand that when you have, like, from the corporate standpoint, you have that big investment, and you're like, it's going to be like, we have this person who doesn't have the name recognition. It's going to be easier to convince a reader to read 1,000 words versus 100,000 words. But yeah, especially if you have when you have a story like that, if you get somebody invested, then they're just going to want that much more.
Exactly, yeah. And I'd say I've always been kind of the mind where it's there's no wrong way to publish the story that you want to do, but there are some avenues that are more suited to the story that you have. And you might have a story that is more suited for traditional publishing, and I think the writer who's done it has to have the mindset where it's like, if it's someone who is very much like, I want to control everything about this book, traditional publishing isn't for them, and probably with an indie publisher isn't for them either. It's probably is self-publishing, where it's someone who's kind of like, look, I just want to make this, I want to sell it, and I want it to be as popular as possible. Then that is probably the route to go, because there is that amount of people will come into it and try and mold it that kind of way. But it's fascinating, and you're right. Like, when you first sit down to write that first paragraph, none of that comes into your head. It's just like, I just have a story that I want to tell, but then you have to tell it like a story. Every single chapter has to have a beginning, middle, and end, and that has to service the larger beginning, middle, and end, and there needs to be peaks and troughs of action and emotion and all this kind of stuff that goes along with it. chapters can't be too long, they can't be too short, and all this kind of stuff, so it's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, David, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot. Our listeners, I'm sure, are excited and they've learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it.
Of course. Will, thank you for co-hosting with me. And I got to give a shout out to my roommate for the Nespresso coffee. Thank you, Ari. So throwing that out there. But thank you so much. We'll post this later today and really appreciate your time, man.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it. It was great fun.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to Nerds and Friends.